How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Double Pebble. So last week we got the introduction out of the way. Today we are going to talk about something a lot more interesting to you guys, and that is the investment topics. Today what we'll be talking about will be my investment stories, how I started investing, why I started investing, and along the way, what are some of the lessons that I've learned. So to start things off, why did I want to start investing? This really goes back to my childhood, right? So I didn't come from a rich family. I came from a single income family where my father was working. And then along the way, he got retrenched, and then life took a turn for the worse. I still remember coming out of army, I somehow, some way saved $10,000. That was like my first milestone that I set for myself financially, which is to have 10K savings coming out of army. But by the end of my universities, basically all these savings were gone because my university was self-funded, and I basically had to help out the family. So that was really what motivated me to want to invest, to grow my money, try and be as financially independent as possible. So from my early childhood all the way to my adolescence, it sort of shaped the way I view money. And then in university, I started thinking about how to really start investing. And I happened to have a very good friend of mine. We've been friends for almost 20 years, and he was investing during our poly days, right? But along the way, whenever I ask him about investments, sort of brush it away. Again, it goes back to, people don't really talk about money and all these things. So finally, I remember during my university internship period, I went to meet him for a drink. I think we were all quite stressed out with life. So I asked him, how do I go about starting investing? And I remember he asked me one question. Do I know who is Warren Buffett? So back then, I think around year three of university, I have no idea who is Warren Buffett. I probably only heard about Bill Gates being a very rich guy. That's about it. He asked me to go and research, Warren Buffett and his company Berkshire Hathaway, and that sort of started me down the path of investment. So I remember the first book that I read was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. I think it's a very famous book. A little bit controversial in terms of the teachings, but the most important thing that I took away was that purely working alone is not sufficient, and we'll be in the rat race of basically earning a salary and then paying the bills and loans and all these things, and then we repeats and repeats, right? So we have to invest to break out of the rat race. And then from there, I started to read a lot of books on Warren Buffett. A lot of my teachings are from Warren Buffett, and my investment philosophy is also based on value investing, focus investing on basically this old man Warren Buffett, right? So I'll be citing a lot of teachings that he shared, and I'll share that with you guys over the next series of videos. I started reading a lot of books on Warren Buffett. For example, I can think of the Essays of Warren Buffett, which is like a compilation of all his shareholder letters. Started reading Snowball, the Warren Buffett Way, for example. So from there, I started to learn, the things that he started to share. The most famous, for example, is like, be greedy when others are fearful, and then be fearful when others are greedy, for example. There's a lot more than that. And then I figured, you know what, it's about time I dip my toes into the world of investing. So I remember I started off looking at all the stocks in SGX. So Warren Buffett shared that we have to invest within our circle of competence. So only in companies or industries that we know very well. I don't really know too many industries. So I started looking at the Singapore stocks from A to Z. And you would have seen names like Bread Talk, Old Chunky, OSIM, Super Group, and so on and so forth. And then eventually I stumbled upon the first stock that sort of checks all the boxes for me, and that was Super Coffee, right? For those who are in Singapore and Malaysia, you probably have heard of Super Coffee. You might have drank it before in a supermarket, the 3-in-1 instant coffee. So back then, they were a public company, right? So I did all my analysis, did my calculations, whatever I know at that time, calculated the intrinsic value, and I decided, hey, you know what? Super is a good company to invest in. And I ran it through my friend, and funnily enough, he also invested in Super Group. I think that was like the moment where we sort of think like, hey, you know what? We both might be on the same wavelength. After deliberating for a long time, I decided to buy one lot of Super Group back then, which was 1,000 shares. For those who are a little bit younger, those days you need to buy minimum 1,000 shares in Singapore, right? So I remember putting in about 1.1, 1.2K into the stock. And back then, I don't have a lot of money. probably I have about $3,000 to $5,000 with me, not a lot. So that was about maybe 30% of my net worth. So this is where we really talk about the emotional side of it. I was a nervous wreck buying the stock. I remember my heart was pounding. I was really nervous about my broker executing the trade. I have no idea what to expect, and there was a lot of fear. I'll be the first to admit that I was really afraid that I'll lose my money. Like most people, right? Most normal people will worry about that. Fast forward a few months, it didn't go great. I remember my purchase price was about $1.10, $1.20 per share back then. And looking at the charts, you would see, right? It started dipping to 80 cents, 90 cents. The growth didn't really happen. I think they were trying to penetrate into the Southeast Asia market, but it didn't really happen. And that was when I really had to practice the emotional control of not panicking and trying to continue staying patient and all these things. And then eventually in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, Supergroup got acquired by a Dutch company and went private. So what happened was the Dutch company bought every single share off the market and took it private, and us as shareholders were sort of paid according to the number of shares that we have. So looking at the numbers, I was paid about $1.30 for each share that I had, which was 1,000 shares. So I invested about 1.1, 1.2K and got back about 1.3K. So that was my first investment experience. It didn't went very well because most of the time my stocks were down when the rate. I was checking the stocks every day as a novice investor, very worried. Even till today, I'm checking my stocks every day out of habit. Of course, the emotional control part is really not so easy because you are seeing your money dip. Even though it's just a few $100s, it was quite a sum of money for me back then. Which goes into my next point, emotional control. A lot of the time, newcomers to investing will think that there's a lot of calculations involved. You need to look at the charts, the ratios, and all these things. But actually, to me, at least 50% or more in investing is about emotional control. In my previous video, I talked about how when it comes to investing, most people are irrational, right? So let me give you an example over here. Let's say we are talking about a Rolex watch. Let's use a Batman GMT for example. I think it's retailing about 14, 15,000 in Singapore right now. So if you are a watch enthusiast and today Rolex tells you original Batman GMT selling you at about $8,000 per watch, you probably will snap at it because it's original, right? And it's only selling at half the price. You will buy. But today, let's say you want to buy a Rolex Batman GMT, right? And then today, Rolex tell you, hey, you know what? We double the price. It's going to be 30, 35,000 right now. You might not buy, right? For the ladies, same thing. Today we have a Birkin bag selling at a 50% discount, original brand new Birkin bag. You most likely would buy, assuming you are into handbags and all these things. You would buy, right, at 50% discount. But if Hermes was to double the price, you wouldn't buy it, correct? So when it comes to investing, a lot of people think the other way. So if today you are a shareholder of, let's say, Nvidia, and the stock price crashed by 50%, a lot of the people will panic and sell at a discount and lock in their losses, right? Rather than buy more, which is counterintuitive of your normal behavior because the business that you are buying is at a discount. So why are you selling? And that goes into the next point, which is when you are buying a stock, you're not buying a counter on a chart that goes up and down, green and red. You are actually buying a small piece of the business, right? You are the shareholder, you own the business, albeit a very small piece of the business, which means to say that actually the CEO is working for you as a shareholder. For example, Tim Cook is working for the shareholders because his job is to bring value to the shareholder by growing the company. So you have to think this way, that investment is about buying a business. So if, for example, you like Apple a lot and you decided to invest in Apple, if Apple drops by 50% and you still believe in Apple as a business, why would you sell? You should buy instead, right? So of course, it's easier said than done when you see that your hard-earned money has dropped by 50%. Let's say you have $10,000 invested and right now you're only left with 5,000. Of course you will panic. Of course you will feel sad, right? But what you always have to remind yourself is, do you still believe in the company? If you still believe in the company, and you have done your calculations and it's at a big discount right now, what you should do is to buy more, right? Another irrational example that I can think of would be cars, for example, right? Every car owner in Singapore at least knows that cars are depreciating asset, right? The moment you drive your car out of the showroom, the value starts to depreciate and drop every single day. But you don't hear car owners complain that their assets are dropping. They don't panic sell, correct? They just continue to drive the car, which is the exact same thing as stocks. If your stocks drop by half, you need to stay calm. Will you feel sad about it? For sure you will. I've went through multiple so-called corrections, the COVID one, President Trump's first and second term. The recent one was in March. I think my portfolio dropped by 20% or thereabout. Of course I feel sad, right? But it's really about emotional control. So we have went through why I started investment, how I started investment, how my first investment went, which was pear-shaped. Fortunately, I didn't lose money, but I didn't earn any money as well. The last thing that we want to talk about for this video is how do you start investing, right? We'll go into a lot more details in future videos, but what I wanted to share is that before you even start investing, there are two things that you have to have in place, right? And they're not sexy, to be honest. The first thing is insurance. You need to always get your insurance in place. I used to be an insurance agent, and this is a topic for another day. I believe that all you need at the least is hospitalization plans and term plans, not the whole life plans. It will open a whole can of worms. Insurance agents will attack me, but I personally think that term plans and hospitalization plan are the essential and what you need, right? And the next thing that you need is to have emergency savings. The conventional thinking is you need about 6 months of your expenses saved as cash in case shit happens. But being Singaporean, I'm very kiasu lah. So I saved about 2.5 years worth of emergency funding for my family in the event that both my wife and I lose our jobs, right? So once you have these two settled, which is the insurance and your emergency sum, then you can talk about investments. The next step, to me at least, is to decide on your investment philosophy. Are you a trader? Would you want to buy and sell every day, every week? Are you a long-term investor like Warren Buffett? Would you want to buy a company and hold for 10, 20, 30 years until your retirement? Or would you want to play options and sort of speculate on the stock movement? Once you have decided on your investment philosophy, then you start looking at brokers. Do you want to use a traditional stockbroker like Phillips Capital? Do you want to use the banks, Stanchart? And these days there's a lot of apps, Tiger, Moomoo, Weeboo, interactive brokers. There's many options. Then from there, once you have everything settled down, you can start looking at stocks. Would you want to look at stocks? Would you want to look at ETFs? That you have to decide. Of course, I'll be here over the next few videos talking about what I've done, what I've chosen, and you guys by now know that I'm a long-term investor. I bought stocks like Apple in 2018 and been holding since. So this you really have to decide for yourself. So in general, based on my experience, if you're averse to risk and don't like excitement, for the lack of a better word, in investment, it might be better to go long term. In fact, my wife's philosophy is the best. She basically leaves the money to me to do the investment and forgets about it until I update her. So that is a very good way of investing as well if you think about it, because you buy a good company and you forget about it. In 10 years time, this company will probably in a much better place than right now, right? So I think that is all I want to share for this video. I think it's been quite a long video, and we will share more about my investment journey in the next video. So as always, don't forget to click like, share and subscribe for my channel. It's really super helpful and I appreciate all your support, and I'll see you in the next video.